Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are going to be covering today the 7 psychological perspectives and then get into my favorite topic of psychology, which is the nature versus nurture debate. All right. So, what I want you to do for your intro question today is here's a little scenario. We've got your friend Barb. She's been acting distant. You've called her up to hang out a few times this past week, but she says she can't. Um, you're concerned, you don't know what's going on, and she seems off, and you're worried she might be mad at you. So I want you to explain why she might be acting this way. Why is she engaging in this kind of weird, different behavior? So what we're going to see here is that there's plenty of different reasons for why she could be acting this way. And we're going to use the 7 psychological perspectives to try and explain some of these different reasons for why she could be acting this way. So maybe Barb's acting this way because she felt pressured to hang out with a different group. She had some kind of peer pressure, or maybe even like her parents are saying like she's a bad influence. Don't hang out with her. Hang out with these people. So this idea that like something in her social environment in her life is causing her to act that way is in accordance with the sociocultural perspective. Right? It's all tied in with your social environment and the groups you're a part of. Barb could also be acting weird because she's going through depression. And I put biological here because that's just what I'm emphasizing at the moment. But we know that mental illness is a combination of biological, cognitive, and sociocultural factors. So Barb could be acting different because she's depressed. So maybe this is connected in with biological, and that like she could have a lack of serotonin, the neurotransmitter, and maybe she needs to get a medication that increases those serotonin levels. We know depression is also tied in with cognitive and how you think and those thinking patterns, and also the social environment you're in as well. Another reason, Barb could be cleansing and trying to cut out the toxic people in her life. Maybe, just maybe, you're one of those toxic people. Rough. So this would connect with the humanistic perspective, and I'll give an example here of what that is, but it would talk about how she might not be having her relationship needs being met, and she's trying to, focus on making her life a little more positive. All right, so anyway, this is a good example of what we're seeing. The idea that one behavior could have plenty of underlying reasons is what we're looking at. And we're going to be looking at 7 of these psychological perspectives that I kind of referenced here. And we're going to see that a perspective is a lens through which you are looking at and analyzing behavior. And these perspectives each have their own kind of set of assumptions and values and beliefs that differ them from one another. And because they have these differing sets of assumptions and values and beliefs, they're going to explain that behavior differently. And that's why we see here that I mentioned 3 different perspectives. Each perspective is explaining the cause of that behavior in a little bit of a different way. So that's what we're going to see here, is that using the 7 psychological perspectives and really using them together, you get a holistic explanation for behavior. But we're going to see again that each perspective is going to look at the behavior differently and analyze it a little differently to come up with that different cause for what could be going on. So we'll add a practice one of the unfortunate case that's happening too often of a school shooter. You see in the news, there's often lots of talks and conversations about like, why could this happen? What would motivate or cause someone to engage in this horrific act? So some questions we'll see. A biological psychologist might look at, does the shooter have a brain disorder? We know that if you have certain areas of the brain damaged, it could result actually in increase in aggression or a lack of impulse control, depending on what part's been damaged. Also, neurotransmitters, again, we know are important in kind of regulating our behavior as well. So maybe they have an off balance or something. Also, do they have genetic tendencies towards violence? That's something that could be interesting to a biological psychologist that they might inquire about. Asking if they've been rewarded for violent behavior in the past. So maybe their parents have praised aggressive behaviors and things. Especially we see this with men, and that idea that like guys gotta be tough. So have they been rewarded for violent behavior? This would be something in accordance with the behavioral perspective that we'll see emphasizes rewards and punishments and behaviors. Ooh, my sink is falling apart. All right. Then we look at the sociocultural lens. So one question that the sociocultural perspective may ask is maybe it's because of the media. Like if you think about video games, right? There's always that controversial topic of like, oh, do violent video games cause more violence? So could it be the cause of this horrific act is because they've been seeing violence all over the media and movies, kind of glorified in video games and things like that. So what we're going to do now is go through each of these 7 perspectives, kind of look at what their values and beliefs are, and then look at how they might analyze. I'm going to use the case study of a school shooter and look at how each of these 7 perspectives would analyze and look at that, the questions they'd ask, and then how what the cause would be for each of these, or what each perspective would see as the cause of this behavior. All right, so we'll start with the behavioral perspective. So the behavioral perspective really focuses on the behaviors as being learned, and that really saying we can be shaped to do anything, that everything, all our behaviors are because we were either rewarded for doing them in the past, or we aren't doing a behavior because we were punished for doing it. So they say that, again, everything we do, we're doing either because we were rewarded and reinforced for doing that behavior and praised for it in the past. And then if we stop a behavior or don't do it, it's probably because we were punished for doing that behavior. So behavioral perspective really would emphasize this idea that like you learn this behavior by either being rewarded or punished for it. So the idea of the school shooter here would be that you were maybe they were rewarded for violence in the past. Maybe again this idea that their parents praised aggressive behavior and being tough or things like that. But the behavioral perspective really says that we can be shaped to kind of become anything. We can be taught to become anything, that we actually don't have that much agency over our own lives, and everything, kind of all our decisions and everything we do is really because we were taught those things, and we were either rewarded or punished in a way to make us either do or not do certain behaviors. So, a quote that shows this is John B. Watson. He's a really famous behavioral psychologist, and he says, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well formed in my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select: doctor, lawyer, artist, even a beggarman or thief, regardless of their talents, abilities, race, etc." So again, this idea that you can teach anyone any behavior. You just have to give them rewards or punishments, those reinforcers and such, and you can kind of shape them into anything. So very much in terms of nature versus nurture, we're going to see very much on the idea that nurture is really influential and that we really don't, it doesn't matter what our biology is, that we can be shaped into anything. Okay, next perspective is cognitive. And I talk about all the time, cognitive is like top 10 words to know in this class. So cognitive meaning thinking. So the cognitive perspective is going to focus on, in analyzing behaviors, focusing on how we think and process information from our environment. So looking at just how we interpret things, how we process things, just how we are thinking about things and our thought processes, how that might cause us to engage in certain behaviors. So a potential explanation from the cognitive perspective in terms of the school shooter scenario could be like maybe this person had really negative self-talk, really negative thought patterns, had a very pessimistic view, and just really unhealthy thought patterns, right? So it kind of is tied in with how you're thinking and processing things. We talk about decision making too. Maybe decision making plays into it, and that they aren't making rational decisions, right? There's something kind of off in how they're processing these things. Humanistic perspective, this is my favorite. It's kind of the rainbows and unicorns perspective. So it's all about this idea that everyone has the potential to self-actualize and be their very best self and like achieve their dreams and like be the very best. They say that this doesn't happen in everybody because their needs are not being met. And we're going to see here, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow is a very famous humanistic psychologist. So this is a famous picture. You might have seen this before. But Maslow has that there's a pyramid of needs that we need to meet in order of importance in order to self-actualize or just be happy and be our very best selves. So we need to meet our physiological needs, which are kind of your basic needs like food, water, etc. We need to meet our safety needs. So we need to, right, you think like people in Afghanistan, like living in a war zone or feeling safe, right? Like you just need to be able to feel comfortable and safe where you're living. Love and belonging. So this is like your relationship needs, whether it be friendship or a love connection or something like that, family, etc. And then esteem needs. So this is how you feel about yourself. Do you have a positive sense of self? Do you respect yourself, etc. And then once you have all those met, Maslow and the humanists say that then you should be able to self-actualize and you'll be happy and successful. So humanistic perspective, the humanists are going to say that your behavior, it's going to be good if you have all your needs met. But if you don't have all your needs met, that can be kind of the explanation for why you're not engaging in positive behavior. So example of the school shooter could potentially be like maybe their belonging needs weren't met, and that that caused a problem. And if they had their needs met, they wouldn't have engaged in this really horrific behavior. So right, maybe their love and belonging needs weren't met. They didn't have those connections and positive relationships, and that could have contributed to this. All right, now on to psychodynamic perspective. This is Freud's perspective, our weird dude over here. And if you know about Freud, we know it's all about the unconscious. So when I had you draw that picture of a psychologist on the first day of class, a lot of you drew something that looked like Freud, with the person taking notes and the client over on the couch sharing their repressed memories and traumas. So psychodynamic perspective, as you probably know, would focus on the dark forces of our unconscious, thinking about what's going on in our unconscious that we're not aware of, that's kind of boiling up and causing problems. Thinking about repressed memories, particularly from childhood, things that were traumatic that we buried down and aren't consciously aware of, right? Past traumas, childhood experiences, kind of these inappropriate needs and desires we might not be aware of, all weird stuff. He's a weird dude. So psychodynamic perspective might say that, maybe this kid had a trauma that they repressed and buried away, and that's kind of eating at them unconsciously and causing this behavior. So they might say again that it's caused by impulses or conflicts buried away in the unconscious. Quick note, you'll see two terms referenced throughout the course. There's psychoanalysis, psychodynamic. Psychoanalysis is kind of Freud's unique perspective that he created, and then this merged and developed into psychodynamic, which is kind of the contemporary perspective. We know that you're going to learn that Freud really is weird and not scientific, and there's a lot of real critiques and issues with his work in terms of how credible it is. So psychodynamic perspective is kind of the modern take and actually the more scientific take on Freudian ideas. Okay. Then we got sociocultural perspective. So this is, like I said, all you people who took soc out there are aware of this. So it's the idea that behavior is caused by our social environment. So, right, think Mean Girls. I wore army pants and flip-flops because Regina wore army pants and flip-flops, right? You're doing things because of what's going on around you in your social environment, because of the groups you're a part of and all that. So again, what's determining behavior? It's the person's social interactions and environment. So, and not only just social interactions like groups you're actively talking to, but think about the media as an agent of socialization as well, social media, what you're seeing on TV, etc. Um, so, like I said earlier, right, the idea that guns and violence is glorified in the media, um, and maybe we are a part of groups. Even we talk about like if you're in a gang or something, or you're raised in that environment, right? That would be an environment that also supports and condones violence. Um, so yeah, right. Maybe they're playing violent video games. Could be the explanation that a sociocultural perspective holder might give. All right. Then we got biological perspective. So again, the idea that it's something biological with our brain structures or brain chemistry that could be causing this. So we're going to talk all about this in Unit 2. So, our frontal lobe is something that is connected to impulse control and decision making. So, maybe if that frontal lobe is damaged, that could be something that could cause someone to act in an inappropriate manner. Okay, then we've got the evolutionary perspective, our last one. This one's kind of niche, right? It's a little harder to apply in all situations, but just think to what you learned in biology about Darwin and his evolutionary theories of natural selection and all that. So, saying that behavior, we inherited that from our ancestors, and the reason we are engaging in behavior probably is because it's adaptive and helped us survive. It's all connected to that idea of like natural selection, survival of the fittest mentality. So we are engaging in behavior because we're trying to survive and reproduce. So it's that real simple kind of evolutionary theory. And like we're trying to reproduce and get our offspring to continue evolving and passing on from generation to generation. So we're engaging in behaviors with the goal of trying to survive and reproduce. So here we'd say, we'd also focus on like attraction and adaptation as well. Um, so, what we could say here is that maybe aggression was something that was an adaptive behavior passed down from ancestors, right? Something that helped you survive and carry on your offspring for future generations. So, this person could have engaged in aggressive behavior because it was something that was adaptive in the past. All right. So, there you have it. This is the overview of your 7 psychological perspectives. And I try to, like I mentioned, it's really good to know the key terms, and I try to highlight those in each one. You'll see, right, like these white ones here. Tried to really highlight some of those key terms to know for each perspective. So maybe you are on a test and you have a multiple choice question, and it's talking about Josie is dealing with some repressed memories. Which perspective does this align with, right? Then you can see that keyword repressed memory. You're going to know, ding, 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 it's probably psychodynamic. Okay, so we're going to quickly touch on the nature nurture debate before we round out this lesson. So, my favorite. We're going to see that the 7 perspective kind of fall along the continuum of nature versus nurture. And if you haven't heard this debate already, we'll get into it. So, nature versus nurture is the idea, the kind of big question that psychologists will always debate about forever and ever, of is our behavior more a result of our nature, so due to our biology and our genetics, or our nurture, so the sociocultural environment that we're a part of. And you're going to see, right, that some perspectives are more connected to nature and others are more connected to nurture. And I'll show you that right here, right? So biological evolutionary, very heavily nature, right? Because it's talking about like genes being passed down, biological structures in the brain, neurotransmitters. But some are more nurture, right? We said behavioral, this idea that you can be taught to do anything, right? That's your environment that is influencing you. Sociocultural, right? All about these social groups we're a part of and the media and different things that socialize us. Cognitive, humanistic, psychodynamic, kind of in the middle, right? Because cognitive is tied in with thinking. So We know that kind of our genetics and biology could impact how we think, but as well, so could our sociocultural environment. Humanistic perspective, again, something that's connected to both, as well as psychodynamic, a little bit of both. Um, so just in terms of nature nurture, the end moral of the story is that everything is really usually some kind of combination of nature and nurture. There's very few things that are solely nature or solely nurture. So when you think of things like uh, intelligence, is your level of intelligence more due to your genetics or more due to your environment and how you were raised, right? We know that it's probably some kind of combination. Same thing with having a mental illness or things like gender identity. We know that a lot of these are connected to both nature and nurture. When it comes to mental illness, though, we're going to see that in some cases, certain things might be more nature or more nurture. Um, right? So it's not always going to be the same, but usually there is some kind of combination of the two at play. So to round out, we're going to see that you'll see that it's very limiting if you are just using one perspective to explain why a behavior occurred. You're kind of limited, right? So if we go back here to the school shooter example and we see the biological perspective of, okay, maybe it's their frontal lobe that's damaged. Okay, well, that doesn't take into account anything about like how they were raised, right? What if you see a lot of times you see like, oh, this person was really socially isolated or they had a bad home life, right? You're totally missing that part of the picture too if you're just looking at biology. Um, if you are just looking at behavioral and this idea of being rewarded and punished for things, like, right, you're totally missing the idea that it could be the result of a biological thing as well that you don't know about, right? So you're really just missing out if you're only using one of these perspectives. So it's really important to combine together so you can get that holistic view of what could be causing a certain behavior. And this is what the biopsychosocial approach does. So this is kind of what contemporary psychologists use. So anytime you look at something, especially like a mental illness, you need to look at the biological causes for something. So, is it what's going on in terms of hormones, neurotransmitters, brain structures? And then you need to look at the psycho, which is another word. Psycho is kind of a synonym for cognitive here. So, kind of the thought patterns and all that kind of stuff. So, just how you're thinking. And then the sociocultural influence in terms of what's going on in your environment and your social world that's causing this, right? So maybe in terms of school shooting, it could be that they had some kind of issue in that their neurotransmitters are off or there's a brain injury going on. But also, it could be maybe they have really unhealthy thought patterns. And maybe it's also that they, were rewarded for violence in the past, or that they have live in a culture that's kind of glorifying these things, or they saw something on social media that might provoke that. Right? It's really important to look at all three of these things in understanding anything. And we'll see as we cover Unit 8 in terms of mental illnesses that pretty much every mental illness is going to have biological, cognitive, and sociocultural causes contributing to it. So that's what we have here. All right, so that's all I have for you today. We'll be back next week. See ya.